Let's look at some of the longer term implications of this and associated natural disasters. With me is Fiona Davis. She's CEO of Farmers for Climate Action. Fiona, thanks for your time. You've released a report this week. I've been reading impacts of climate change on our food supply. I tell you what, the timing could not have been more appropriate given the events of the last fortnight, Fiona.
Look, we commissioned the report before all this happened, and our thoughts are absolutely with folks in Queensland and New South Wales. It's a terrible time. The reality is that we are having more of these extreme events, and ultimately they're impacting on our food supplies as well as on, every element of our lives. We've just seen in the footage you've been showing there. What we really need to see from our perspective is deep emission cuts this decade to address climate change, because climate change is already making food prices higher. We've got less water. We've got the increased extreme weather events. Farmers are growing less food, and it's hard to get food to supermarkets and onto dining tables. When
you talk about that, the less water question, obviously there'd be those that say, what about the moment? I mean, there's no shortage, but the problem is, and as this report goes into with the cycle, this is very much the anomaly, La Nina, and over the next decade, a return to very dry conditions is looming. And as you point out in this report, that the impact of to consumers is great, that there's more lost food, less grass for farmers' livestock to eat, and less days to transport livestock.
Absolutely. It's making farming so much more difficult. So, when we're seeing that there's a lot of water at north at the moment, but other areas aren't having that. So it's very unpredictable for farming at the moment, which makes it very, very hard. How do you plan for your seasons? How do you plan for your farm business? So as well as the impacts of when we do have things like floods, things like bushfires, things like droughts, which we've seen in quick succession over the last 3 years. So farmers are great at adapting. They're doing what they can. Ag stepping up with its emission reductions, doing its part, setting a net zero by 2030 target in the red meat industry. Australian pork set a 2025 target. What we're looking for now is bipartisan support for deep emission cuts this decade, because climate change is getting worse and it's emissions that is driving this. If we can get bipartisan support for deep emission cuts this decade, it's going to save us a lot of heartache in the long run. It's going to save us a lot of money. And it's also going to set us up for opportunities, because we often think of climate change in terms of floods, bushfires, droughts, and that is exactly what is happening. But also, as we shift to a low emissions future, rural and regional Australia stands to benefit from this shift with the jobs and investment that can flow into their regions.
And we've seen that farmers have been adapting already, leading the way in many respects, some having to shift to areas with more reliable rainfall and so on. And that does raise the issue of stranded assets and things like that for the sector to grapple with, Fiona.
Look, we have farmers in our network who have relocated south because of water issues, because they see the climate there will be better for their farm business in the long run. But the reality is not everyone can do that. So we need to be doing all we can do to support farmers to be able to adapt. But we also need to make that adaptation possible. And the reality is we saw the IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report that came out the other week, and it showed really clearly how serious this risk is for Australian farms, as well as the Australian community more generally. We have the solutions. We just need to see that political ambition right across the political spectrum to be able to act on this as soon as possible.
Farmers for Climate Action, CEO Fiona Davis, thanks. Talk to you soon.
Thanks so much.